How different would this film be if it were made today? This is one of those films for me which perfectly captures the time period in which it was produced, just as much as Star Wars: A New Hope captures 70s for me in family filmmaking. Back to the Future absolutely nails its time period in terms of not just filmmaking, but what audiences appreciated, what kind of comedy we found funny, and all that sort of stuff, which, you know, sort of makes the memories of watching this film just so beautiful and so fond. So the content in this film, yeah, there's actually quite a bit of stuff which today would be considered fairly questionable. Let's start with the violence. The big issue, I think, with the violence in the film, and remember, it's a comedy, it's all supposed to be funny, but these themes have a very different meaning today than they did back in 1985. The big theme, I think, in terms of violence is about the terrorism. So Doc steals some plutonium from some terrorists and they come after him. And you see people being shot and shot at by terrorists. And the word terrorist is used quite frequently through the film. You also see people struck by lightning. You see some reckless driving. And I remember very specifically when this film was released that all the discussion surrounding the film, the controversy around this film, was about Marty when he latched onto a police car as well as some other vehicles at the beginning of the film. He hitches a ride while he's on his skateboard. And I remember all of the discussion on television talking about how irresponsible that was to encourage that kind of behaviour in teenagers. Today, I don't think anyone would even regard that as newsworthy. But there is a bit of reckless driving. There's a few chase scenes in the film, and there's a minor vehicle accident where a vehicle collides with another truck full of some rather unpleasant material. So other forms of violence, there's actually a fair bit of kind of one-on-one fist fighting and arguing and threatening in the film. One particular character is threatened quite frequently, actually two characters really, by a bully. So bullying is a really strong theme in this film. And there's one scene in particular where there's, punching and push and shove, and a man has his, arm snapped behind his back and that kind of stuff. So it does get a little bit heated, and the tension in these scenes are actually quite high. Now, the violence I'm going to transition that into the sex as well. This particular bully is quite belittling when it comes to one female character in particular. And he does harass her. In fact, I'd go so far to say that he almost molests her in some scenes. There's one particular scene in a car where this bully is all over her and he seems to be manhandling her. She's pleading for help. And back then, again, this was a comedy. We didn't really talk so much about inappropriate behaviour in dates. We didn't talk about date rape. We didn't talk about these things quite as openly as we do today. And, so watching it with today's eyes is quite different. Back in the 80s, this was seen as comedy. It probably wouldn't have the shock value and the discomfort that we would bring to it today, watching this poor girl being, potentially molested by this bully. So, but the sex that I find really interesting about this film is in the relationship between the mother and the son. I mean, basically, it's almost kind of incestuous. If you haven't seen the film, the mother character, a very younger version of the mother character, so when she's a girl, falls in love with this boy who happens to be her son because he's travelled back in time. You probably know this already. So, and there's a bit of touching and caressing and flirtation, and it all kind of, ends in a very sort of innocent kind of kissing scene where she kisses the son. And even she says it's like kissing her brother. But yeah, I would have to wonder if today that kind of level of boundary pushing sexuality and discussion about sex would make it into a script these days. In this film, in this context, it's very funny as it's meant to be. But it's kind of curious looking at it from a modern perspective. Most of the sex is that's really it. There's the flirting, there's the budding romance, there's some dancing and kissing and hand holding and that sort of stuff. But yeah, but that kind of sums up the sex. There's no, nudity in the film or anything. The other thing that's kind of surprising that we tend to omit from kids' films these days is the swearing in the film. So there's quite a few S words and A words, quite a few B words and name calling, but there's several scenes which depict quite strong African American stereotypes as well as gender stereotypes, and these would probably be considered quite offensive if they were put into film today. The other thing is the alcohol. There's alcohol does have a presence in the film, no more or no less than most films today do, but I think there's some wine on tables, and there's a suggestion of an alcoholic mother who sort of relies on the spirits. There's also strong references to a jailed criminal brother and uncle. So there's all these sort of, these things that would flag as potentially offensive or upsetting issues in Back to the Future, but, we look upon it as one of the best films to come out of the 80s. So I love watching this film with my own children and getting their reactions because they see it so differently to how I did when it came out. But absolutely watch it. It's a family-friendly film. If you want to read more about the specifics of the content, then please do have a look at the website, which is cinemum.net. But before you go, please subscribe to the channel.